What if the smartest decision a man could make is to never get married? And the answer might change how you see everything. Now, before you click off, I'm not talking about men who can't find love. I'm not talking about guys who are bitter, broken, or hiding in their mum's basement playing video games. I'm talking about some of the most powerful, accomplished, wealthiest, and mentally sharp men on the planet. Men who looked at marriage, looked at everything it offers, and said, "No thank you." And here's what nobody is asking. What do they know that we don't? Because here's the thing. We live in a society that tells men from the moment they're old enough to understand that finding a woman, settling down, getting married, and starting a family is the ultimate goal. It's the finish line. It's the thing that validates you as a man. Your parents ask about it. Your co-workers ask about it. The movies, the songs, the TV shows, all of it is pointing you toward this one destination. So when a man who has everything, the money, the status, the looks, the options, deliberately, consciously, permanently chooses to opt out of that destination forever, we need to stop and ask why. Because they're not doing it by accident. They're doing it by design. And here's something. Psychology tells us that most people completely overlook the decision-making process of high achievers is fundamentally different from the average persons. Psychologists call it System 2, thinking slow, deliberate, analytical reasoning that overrides gut instinct and social pressure. Most people make life decisions, including marriage, based primarily on emotion, cultural expectation, and what everyone around them is doing. High achievers, they run the numbers. They model the outcomes. They treat personal decisions with the same rigor they apply to business decisions. And when they apply that kind of thinking to marriage, some of them arrive at a very uncomfortable conclusion. Let's look at some of the most well-known examples, because the pattern here is impossible to ignore. Elon Musk has been married and divorced multiple times, each time more turbulent than the last, each time costing him not just money, but energy, focus, and public stability. He has children, many of them, but the institution of marriage itself has not served him well by any traditional measure. And what does he keep going back to? Work, building, creating. The mission. Warren Buffett, one of the greatest minds in financial history, lived separately from his wife Susie for decades while she moved to San Francisco. He had a companion, Astrid Menks, who later became his second wife after Susie passed. But his emotional and intellectual life was never truly wrapped around a conventional marriage structure. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, who at this point has become something of a cultural punchline for his refusal to commit to any woman over 30. But is it a punchline? Or is it a strategy? Oprah Winfrey's longtime partner Stedman Graham. They've been together since 1986, 40 years, and Oprah has said directly that she believes their relationship has worked precisely because they never got married. If we had been married, she said, we would not be together today. Now, I want you to hold that for a second. One of the most successful women in American history, with unlimited resources, saying that marriage itself would have destroyed what she built with her partner. What does that tell you? It tells you that for certain types of people, certain high-achieving, highly driven, deeply self-aware individuals, the traditional institution of marriage might actually work against them rather than for them. And to understand why, we have to go somewhere most YouTube videos never go. We have to go into psychology. Let's start with something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow was a psychologist who argued that human motivation works in layers. At the base, you have survival, food, shelter, safety. Above that, you have belonging and love. And at the very top, the peak, you have what Maslow called self, the full realization of your potential, becoming everything you are capable of becoming. Here's what's fascinating. Maslow studied people he considered to be truly self-actualized. People like Albert Einstein, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and he found something remarkable. These individuals had a very different relationship with love and belonging than average people. They didn't need external validation the way most people do. They had what Maslow called a profound inner sufficiency. They could enjoy deep relationships, but they didn't depend on them for their psychological stability. Now apply that to the men we're talking about. A man who is operating at the level of self-actualization, who has already answered the question of who he is and what he's here to do, doesn't feel the same desperate need for a partner to complete him. He's already complete, and that changes everything about how he relates to the idea of marriage. He's not saying no to love because he's broken. He's saying no to a particular structure of love because he doesn't need it to feel whole. That's a psychological profile that is genuinely rare and genuinely misunderstood. Now, let's go deeper. Let's talk about attachment theory, because this is where it gets really interesting. In the 1960s and 70s, a British psychologist named John Bowlby developed what became one of the most influential theories in all of modern psychology, attachment theory. The basic idea is this: as infants, we develop a fundamental style of relating to others based on our earliest experiences with caregivers, and that style tends to follow us for the rest of our lives unless we do serious, deliberate work to change it. There are 4 primary attachment styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. People with a secure attachment style grew up feeling consistently loved and supported. They're comfortable with intimacy. They're comfortable with independence. They're capable of long, healthy relationships. People with an anxious attachment style grew up in inconsistent environments. Sometimes love was there, sometimes it wasn't, and they developed a deep fear of abandonment. They tend to cling, they tend to worry, they tend to push for more commitment, more reassurance, more connection. People with an avoidant attachment style, and this is where it gets directly relevant to our conversation, grew up in environments where emotional closeness felt threatening, overwhelming, or unreliable. They learned that depending on other people was dangerous, and so they developed a psychological strategy of self-reliance, so extreme that true intimacy feels not just uncomfortable, but almost physiologically unbearable. Now, here's the critical distinction, and it's one that psychology is only beginning to explore seriously. Some men who identify as avoidant are that way because of genuine psychological wounding. They need healing. They need therapy. They need to do the work. But there's another group, a group that researchers are increasingly interested in, who present with avoidant traits, not because of wounds, but because of temperament. Their nervous system is simply wired for more independence, more solitude, more internal life. They're not avoidant because they were hurt. They're independent because that is genuinely who they are. Psychologists sometimes call this the distinction between fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance. Fearful avoidance is driven by anxiety. They want closeness but are terrified of it. Dismissive avoidance is something more neutral. They simply don't prioritize closeness the way most people do, and they're genuinely okay with that. Many successful men who choose permanent singledom fall into this second category. And the tragedy is that our culture, which has decided that wanting intimacy is healthy and not wanting it is pathological, has never given these men permission to simply be who they are. Let's talk about another psychological concept that helps explain the appeal of single life for high-achieving men. Ego depletion. Psychologist Roy Baumeister introduced the concept of ego depletion in the 1990s. The idea is that willpower, self-control, and decision-making all draw from a limited mental resource, like a battery. Every decision you make, every conflict you navigate, every moment where you have to regulate your emotions or consider someone else's needs, all of that drains the battery. Now here's what this means for a highly successful man running a company, managing teams, making high-stakes decisions every single day. By the time he gets home at 8 o'clock at night, his battery is at 5%. He has almost nothing left. And relationships, real, meaningful, long-term relationships, require energy. They require emotional presence. They require the capacity to listen, to respond, to show up for another person even when you're completely exhausted. Many successful men have quietly discovered that they simply don't have enough battery left for that. Not because they don't care, but because their professional life consumes so much of their cognitive and emotional resources that there's genuinely little left over. And here's the choice. You can try to split your remaining 5% between your work and your relationship, and likely do neither well. Or you can pour all of it back into the work and build something extraordinary. Some men choose the work, and psychology would say, that's not selfishness. That's resource allocation. There's another dimension here that comes straight from neuroscience, and it's about dopamine. Dopamine is one of the primary neurotransmitters in the brain's reward system. It's the chemical of motivation, anticipation, and pursuit. When you're working on something that excites you, a new business idea, a creative project, a problem you're obsessed with solving, your brain is firing dopamine in ways that feel genuinely euphoric. Not just pleasurable, euphoric, like a drug. Here's the thing about highly successful men. Many of them are what neuroscientists call high dopamine sensitives. Their brains respond to intellectual and creative stimulation with an intensity that most people never experience. For them, solving a hard problem or building something new isn't just satisfying. It's deeply, chemically intoxicating. Now, relationships, even great ones, can't always compete with that. Relationships involve routine. They involve conflict. They involve the negotiation of the ordinary. And for a brain that is calibrated to light up at the highest levels of intellectual stimulation, the comparative flatness of domestic life can feel not bad. Exactly, but muted, dimmer. This is why so many creative geniuses throughout history, artists, scientists, inventors, were famously terrible at relationships. It wasn't that they didn't feel love. It's that their brain's reward system was so heavily weighted toward their work that everything else, including love, struggled to register at the same intensity. Isaac Newton, possibly the greatest scientific mind in history, is believed to have died a virgin. He showed no romantic interest in anyone, ever. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't broken. He was simply so consumed by the interior world of his mind that the external world of human relationship never fully captured him. Newton is an extreme example. But the neurological reality he represents, a brain that rewards intellectual pursuit over social connection, is far more common than we tend to acknowledge. Now, let's talk about something called the identity foreclosure trap. This is a concept from developmental psychology, specifically from Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Identity foreclosure happens when a person commits to a life path without ever fully exploring who they are or what they actually want. They adopt the goals and values of their parents, their culture, their community, without ever questioning whether those goals actually fit who they are. Marriage and family is one of the most common arenas where this plays out for men. A man grows up, gets a decent job, meets someone nice, gets married, not because he's made a conscious, deeply considered decision that this is the life he wants, but because this is simply what you do. The next step? The path tells you to do this, so you do it. And then 10 years later, or 20, he looks around at his life and realizes, sometimes with devastating clarity, that he never actually chose any of it. He followed a template, and the template doesn't fit. The men who choose to stay single forever, particularly the successful, self-aware ones, have often done exactly what developmental psychology encourages. They've gone through the process of identity exploration. They've asked the hard questions. They've sat with the uncertainty. And they've arrived at a genuine identity commitment, one that they chose, not one that was handed to them. Psychologists call this identity achievement, and it's considered the healthiest possible developmental outcome. The man who has achieved his identity, even if that identity doesn't match social expectations, is psychologically more solid, more resilient, and more self-aware than the man who never questioned the path he was given. Let's talk about loneliness, because this is the thing everyone always throws at single men as the ultimate checkmate. But aren't you lonely? And here's what psychology actually says about loneliness. Because it's not what most people think. Research by University of Chicago. Psychologist John Cacioppo, who spent his career studying loneliness, found that loneliness is not about being alone. Loneliness is about perceived social isolation. It's about whether you feel connected to other people, seen by them, valued by them. And crucially, some people need very little of this to feel connected. Others need enormous amounts. There's a personality dimension that psychologists call need for affiliation, the degree to which a person craves social connection, and it varies enormously across individuals. Some people feel lonely after a single afternoon by themselves. Others can go days, weeks, in relative solitude and feel genuinely content, even energized. Introversion research, famously explored by psychologist Carl Jung, and more recently by Susan Cain, tells us that introverts, people who draw energy from solitude rather than social interaction, make up somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population. For a true introvert, excessive social engagement isn't just tiring. It's draining in a way that affects performance, mood, and cognitive function. Many successful single men are introverts. And for an introvert, the constant social engagement of living with a partner, the need to be present, responsive, communicative, and emotionally available every evening, can feel genuinely exhausting rather than nourishing. This doesn't mean they can't form deep bonds. It means that those bonds need space, real space, to be sustainable. And permanent cohabitation doesn't always provide that space now. There's another psychological concept I want to bring in here, and it's one that has become increasingly prominent in modern therapy circles. The concept of the authentic self. The authentic self rooted in Carl Rogers. Humanistic psychology is the version of you that exists when all the social expectations, all the external pressures, all the performances you put on for other people are stripped away. It's who you actually are when nobody is watching. When you're not trying to be what your parents want, or what your culture expects, or what your partner needs. Rogers argued that psychological health, real mental wellness, comes from alignment between the authentic self and the life you're actually living. When those two things are out of alignment, when the life you're living is a performance rather than an expression of who you actually are, you feel it. You feel it as chronic, low-grade unhappiness, as the sense that something is wrong even when everything looks fine from the outside, as a quiet desperation that never quite goes away. And here's the brutal truth. For some men, the life that society is pushing them toward, the married, domestic, partnership-based life, is genuinely incompatible with their authentic self. Not because they're bad people, not because they're broken, but because their authentic self is simply wired differently. The men who recognize this, who have the self and the courage to live in alignment with who they actually are, even when it costs them social approval, those men tend to have exceptional psychological health because they're not performing a life, they're living one. There's one more psychological idea I want to bring into this conversation, and it might be the most important one. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to develop one of the most influential schools of psychotherapy, argued that the primary human motivation is not pleasure, as Freud suggested, and not power, as Adler suggested. The primary human motivation is meaning. We can endure almost anything if we understand why. We can sacrifice comfort, security, companionship, almost anything, if we believe it serves a purpose larger than ourselves. Men who choose to stay single forever and pour everything into their work are, at their best, doing exactly this. They have found their meaning. They have found the thing that makes the sacrifice of conventional life feel not like a loss, but like a fair trade. Their work is their why. Their mission is their family. In the deepest psychological sense, Frankl himself wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." The successful single man has his why. And for him, the how, the solitude, the independence, the unconventional life, is not a burden. It's the price of admission to the life that actually means something to him. Now, let's be honest about the other side of this. Because psychology doesn't let anyone off the hook entirely. There is a version of the "I'm choosing to stay single" narrative that is actually, at its core, a reflection of unresolved psychological pain. And it's important to name it clearly. Attachment wounds from childhood, inconsistent parenting, emotional neglect, early experiences of abandonment can create a psychological profile that looks identical to the self-aware solo man from the outside, but is driven by something very different on the inside. Fear, the deep, pre-verbal nervous system level fear that if you let someone truly close, they will leave, or they will hurt you, or the vulnerability of being truly known will destroy you. Psychologists call this the avoidant defense. It's a brilliant psychological strategy, the psyche's way of protecting you from pain it doesn't know how to process. You tell yourself and everyone around you that you prefer to be alone, that you're too focused on your work, that relationships just aren't your priority, and you even believe it, because believing it protects you from having to feel the fear underneath. The test, and this is the test that separates genuine, self-knowledge from sophisticated. Avoidance is how you respond when true intimacy is available. If a person comes along who is genuinely safe, genuinely present, genuinely capable of meeting you where you are, and the thought of letting them in still fills you with dread, that's the avoidant defense talking. That's not a lifestyle choice. That's a wound asking to be healed. Real self-awareness can tell the difference. And the men who are making this choice from genuine wholeness, rather than from hidden fear, know which side of that line they're on. So where does all of this leave us? We've traveled through Maslow and we've looked at attachment theory and the distinction between dismissive and fearful avoidance. We've explored ego depletion and why high achievers run out of emotional bandwidth. We've gone into the neuroscience of dopamine and why creative obsession can push out relational desire. We've talked about identity foreclosure and what it means to genuinely choose your life. We've examined loneliness through Kachapo's research and understood that aloneness and loneliness are not the same thing. We've brought in Carl Rogers' authentic self and Viktor Frankl's meaning-making. And what all of that points to is this: the question of whether a man should stay single forever is not a moral question. It's not a cultural question. It's a psychological one. It's a question of self-knowledge. It requires the kind of honest, rigorous, fearless internal examination that most people never do, because it's easier to just follow the path everyone else is on. The men who stay single and thrive are the ones who have answered that question honestly, who have done the actual work of understanding who they are, how they're wired, what they need, and what they're here to do, and then had the courage to build a life that reflects those answers, even when the world around them doesn't understand it. That's not a failure of love. That's love turned inward, toward the self, toward the work, toward the mission. And whether that's the right answer for you, whether staying single is your truth or your fear, your freedom or your fortress, only you can know. But the only way to know is to stop following the path long enough to actually question it. Stop, look inside, be brutally honest, and then build the life that's actually yours.